coming out tonight. Can you all hear okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stand about in this area. I asked to use the sound system, thank you, Mid-American National Bank, because I can't yell. The Titanic isn't something you probably should yell about. So I'm going to be trying to keep it within the theme. My name is Gwen, and something else that I do is I work at Mid-American National Bank. I will make my 25 years this August. Rick is kind of my boss, yeah, but he comes to tell me what I need to do sometimes. So we're going to get started. Titanic, a story for the ages. One of the things I like to do with history is to kind of give you a point of reference. I mean, Titanic sinking wasn't the only thing that happened in 1912. There are other things that were happening also. There was the electric blanket that was invented, which I'm so happy about because I just bought one this year. Belgian chocolates, that's even better. Lifesaver candy. I thought that was something that just came around when I was a kid. The electric light bulb. Cadillac introduced the electric starter on its Model 30, and then those horseless carriages things that under the name of Sears Motor Buggy. And then there was music that was popular back then. Some of you might have heard the Come Josephine in My Flying Machine. If you've ever seen the movie, that's the one that Rose sings when she's on the door that she didn't want Jack to get on. Maple Leaf Rag, Let Me Call You Sweetheart, and Alexander's Ragtime Band. So those were some that the passengers probably would have heard on the ship. And one thing too about the musicians, if you look on the table, I actually have these little books. That's the song books that the first class passengers would have been given. And supposedly, the musicians, whatever number you called out, they could play the song from memory. I can tell you as a musician, they probably could because everybody picks the same songs all the time. So that's the only way they could have done that. And one thing about Titanic too is everybody seems to focus on just the sinking and when it went out to sea. But the story of the Titanic actually started several years before April of 1912. It started over a dinner conversation in 1907. And that conversation was between J. Bruce Ismay, his whole name was Joseph, but he's usually called J. Bruce Ismay, and Lord William Puri. Now you might have not heard of Lord Puri, and I, until I really started studying, hadn't known how he was factored into this. At their dinner party, they made a plan of what they wanted to focus on. Their competition during that time was the Cunard line. They were with J. Bruce was with the White Star line, and the Cunard line was known for speed. So they were going to go with luxury and size. They wanted to maximize the capacity of the ship. So where are they going to make their money? Third class passengers, steerage. Because think about it, the first class passengers, you won't have that many because you can only do so much with the space, because usually the first class passengers had more space, even some of the second class. So the third class, usually there was about 4 people to a room, a cabin I think, in the third class space, so they could make more money in that area. And their plan was to build what they called the Olympic class of ships. So there's going to be 3 ships. It's going to be Olympic, Titanic, and the Britannic. Now I heard, I don't know how true this is, but the third ship was going to be called the Gigantic. I'm so glad they get to do that. But and the reason for not doing that is it sounded too close to Titanic, and they didn't want it to be associated with the disaster. I don't know how true that is, but I've read that a few times. Lord Puri, he was chairman of Harland and Wolff, which is the company that actually built the Titanic. So in 1902, he and J.P. Morgan, they created the International Mercantile Marine Company. He married Margaret Carlyle, which is the sister of the next person we're going to talk about, Alexander Carlyle, who was actually one of the designers of the Titanic. So you've probably heard of Thomas Andrews. He's the name that most people talk about. But there's other people involved in the building of the Titanic. He was supposed to be a passenger on the Titanic, but he didn't go because he fell ill, and his nephew, Thomas Andrews, went in the front. So just think of it, if he had gone, would he have lived? Would Thomas have, lived and maybe built more ships? And one of the things that you'll see too, as we talk about the Titanic, there's a lot of, I wouldn't call them coincidences, but things that just seem like it was just doomed to sink, like it was just doomed from the start to not make it. And then Mr. Ismay, J. Bruce Ismay, he was an English businessman, and he was actually the chairman of the White Star Line, because his dad, Thomas Ismay, was the one that actually started the White Star Line. And he did usually sail on the maiden voyages of his ship. That wasn't a weird thing for him to be on the Titanic. If, we look at it as it was really special, but at that time, he probably would have been trained as the chairman of the shipping company was on the ship that time. And he did survive the sinking of the Titanic, and there were some people that thought he probably shouldn't have survived. Was he a villain, or was he a victim, or was he a scapegoat? Several men, actually, not just Mr. Ismay, it was found that they survived the sinking. They were kind of looked down upon that, why didn't you go down with the ship, because that's what a gentleman would do. So a lot of times the men didn't want to let anyone know that they actually survived the sinking. Now there was an unofficial award that was given for the fastest ship, and I have to admit, I don't think it's the prettiest award, that would, given to the fastest passenger liner crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and whoever crossed the fastest. And guess who was the winner most of the time? It was the Cunard Line. They had the Mauritania, and also the Lusitania was one of their ships. You might have heard of those names also. And then here's the White Star Line offices. I don't know if you can see it. This is what it looked like in around 1900s, and this is what it looks like today. So it looks pretty much the same. It's just this one isn't in color. So the White Star Line was once known as Ismay Emery Company, and this is the building they used as their headquarters until 1927, when they actually ended up merging with their rival, the Cunard Line. So, and part of the reason was it was a financial decision. They just couldn't stay open, and even the Cunard Line was struggling too. So in 1912, I thought this was interesting. The employees that were working inside the building when the Titanic sank, they couldn't even come out. They were afraid to come out to announce it because they were afraid they would be attacked. So they announced it from the balcony, the names of the people that passed away. So the designers of the Titanic, Mr. Andrews, Thomas Andrews, he was the main engineering director of the drafting department for the shipbuilding company Harlan and Wolff, and he was the naval architect in charge of the plans for the ocean liner. And he was also the nephew of the Lord Curie. So this is kind of like a family business, if you want to say that, as we go through the names of who was related to who. So at the age of 16, he apprenticed at Harlan and Wolff, and then he oversaw the plans for the 3 ocean liners. So it was actually probably a good thing he was on the ship. We'll talk about the details a little more, how him being on there actually probably helped people to realize this is serious, you need to get off this ship right now. So some descriptions of Mr. Adams were he was cheery, he was optimistic, he was generous, and diligent to the point of strenuousness. I guess that means that he worked really hard. I'm gonna start using that in my everyday language. I'm diligent to the point of strenuousness. Okay, Mr. Carlisle, Alexander Carlisle. He also apprenticed at Harlan and Wolff at the age of 16. And during that time at the shipyard, he became friends with Lord Curie, who ended up marrying his sister, so we're all in the family there. And he was one of the designers of the Titanic and the Britannic, but what he focused on more was the decor, the inside, the equipment, the davit system that they used to get the lifeboats out. So he was in charge of that. And there's a program that I watched, and they tell you, we don't know if this happened for sure or not, because I don't want anybody to say, well, that never happened, but this is one of the stories that him and Mr. Ismay met to discuss, the designs of the Titanic, and they were talking about the lifeboats. Well, Mr. Ismay wanted to reduce the number of lifeboats that Mr. Carlisle had put, because he said, people don't pay to look at lifeboats. Now, I'm not saying that happened, but that's one of the stories that's kind of floating around. And after 40 years at Harlan and Wolff, he retired. And he actually became a prominent shareholder in the company that made the davits for the Titanic. So I don't know, is that a conflict of interest? It's one of those things us internal auditors would say, I don't know about that. Okay, designing the Titanic. Now this picture is actually of the Olympic. There's really not very many pictures of the Titanic. And one of the things that I have to be careful with, or I try to be careful with, is making sure the pictures I use are actually Titanic, or is it its sister ship Olympic, because they use the same designs. They built the Olympic and then they did some changes to the Titanic. You know how it is, you make something new and then you're like, oh, we need to change this the next time that we build it. So these are actually the propellers of Olympic. It would probably be pretty close. There's no photos of the Titanic propellers. I always say it this way, you know when you have children, or at least this happened with me, I was the oldest, there's lots of pictures of me. My sister, there was one picture of her in my baby book. So it's kind of like the Titanic was Olympic's younger sister, and there were no pictures of it. So Titanic's gross tonnage was over 46,000 pounds, and it was the biggest ship at the time, because remember, they were gonna go for size and luxury at the White Star Line. And the height was 175 feet from keel to the top of the funnels. Who remembers how many funnels Titanic had?
4.
And did they all work?
No.
Nope. One of them, it was for aesthetic purposes, make it look good, make it look equal. I thought that was funny. A lot of money to make it look good. So the length was over 882 feet, so it was at about 2-3 football fields. And it was built from 2,000 1-inch steel plates and held by 3 million rivets. That's a lot of rivets. So whoever owned that company that they were buying that from was making some money that day. And it had 3 bronze propellers weighing a total of 92 tons. So there was a lot of weight on this ship. So the rivets, this is what they would look like. I call them big nails. So in 1998, excuse me, they actually brought 46 rivets up from the site and they tested them. So they tested the strength of those rivets, and they said the wrought iron rivets that they had in 1912 were a third weaker than the steel of that era, because they weren't all consistent that they used. So the test that they did actually exposed the rivets to the pressure that the Titanic would have had at that time when it struck the iceberg. And what they think is that the rivets popped out at that part whenever it did. And I always wonder, is this one of the only reasons that the hull failed, was because it had weak rivets? And some more facts, it had a speed of 21 knots, so about 24 miles an hour. But think about, you got that much weight going at that speed. Estimated top speed was 23 to 24 knots, and it could hold 2,209 passengers and crew. Now it had 16 watertight doors. The next picture I'll have, and I'll show you that, because this picture is of one of the watertight doors that was on the Titanic. And also, this was neat, they had a swimming pool on the Titanic. This was a new feature. So, and then they had a Turkish bath and a gym, so you can go work out while you're in there. But you have to remember, back then they didn't have tablets and cell phones, and I mean, all you could do was walk around, read a book, talk. That was fun. Go take a nap. And then also third class had indoor toilet facilities. And I read or saw in one program where it said the crew had to teach some of the people in storage how to use those particular items because it wasn't common to have those. So here's a diagram. Let me go back. Here's a diagram of where the lifeboats were. So these are the main lifeboats, which are the green ones, and then the excuse me, and then the emergency cutters are in red, and then the purple are those are collapsibles, I think. Yeah. So here's the top of the ship, here's the staircase, so you can see where the people would have had to go to, and then think about how tall the Titanic was. So when they were lowering them down, it wasn't just a little, okay, now you're down in the water. With those davits, what they did, they actually had to, by hand, get them down. So there was two people trying to get them down, like having to talk to each other to get it to where it wouldn't fall in the water. Excuse me. And with all the chaos that was going on, there were times when sometimes that didn't go very smoothly. Okay, so here's where, for the watertight doors, if you look here on this diagram, or the watertight compartment, sorry, it didn't go all the way up to the ship. So what happened is when those areas did become compromised, and I even thought this when I saw this when I was a kid, well, the water would just go over that whenever it fills up, and that's exactly what happened. So I don't know why I don't think anybody else thought of that. The watertight doors could be closed automatically with a switch from the bridge. So if I don't think they got much warning down or in the hull of the ship whenever that would happen. It was once those doors were closed, they were closed. So there was a design change to the bulkheads, and the reason for that design change was they wanted to make the staircase grander. So they lowered it to 10 feet below the waterline. So you think, if they didn't lower that, would that help the Titanic to not go sink? It's all about luxury. Okay, so this picture, I think this is cool. You have the Olympic and the Titanic side by side getting built together. So the two sisters are together, so that's in 1910. So before construction started, Harlan and Wolff actually had to modify their slipways because there had never been ships built this big before. So they were putting a lot of money into this, not just what they're building, but also how they're having to modify their property. So in September of '08 is when the order to proceed with construction is signed. So we've started in 1907 with the conversation. Now we're like, okay, we're going to put this plan to get going. The first keel plate was laid in 1909, and there were 3,000 men from Harlan and Wolff that were actively working the Titanic. Now they lived pretty close to where they were working, so I can imagine this was like 24 hours a day probably going on. You know, can you imagine the noise, and there's always people around, and there's always buzzing, something buzzing going. So in 1910, the hull was framed. In April and then October, the shell steel plating is completed. In 1911, the unfinished Titanic is launched, but the engines and interior have not been put in yet. And then in 1912, it's done. So we've got from 1907 to 1912, we have a ship. So the launching of the Titanic was a show too. You actually had to have a ticket to get in to see it. Here's a replica of one. There were over 100,000 people that went on May 31st of 1911 to watch the Titanic leave Belfast, Ireland. And they were really proud of their ships. I mean, not just Titanic, but any ship, because it said that even when they heard, the shipbuilders heard that Titanic had sank, many of them cried too, because to them that was their ship also. So timeline of the Titanic going to sea. April 1st was, she was going to have her sea trials, and it was postponed due to bad weather. Is that another woman? So she did her sea trials on April 2nd, but luckily she passed all her sea trials. Then she's loaded with her supplies from April 3rd to the 10th, and the crew is hired, and then April 10th is her day to go out to sea. So she left her dock for her maiden voyage. And this day, talking about how the poor Titanic had everything against her. She was supposed to launch on March 20th of 1912. The reason she didn't, her sister got into an accident with another ship, the Artemis Hawk, and it did a lot of damage. So since they were similar, they brought it back to fix it. They took some of the Titanic's items to fix the Olympic, so that delayed it. And so they got the Olympic going, so they start working back on the Titanic again. But then something else happened during that year. The coal miners' strike of 1912. So that lasted for 37 days, and it was around the time when the Titanic was supposed to go to sea. So nearly 1 million miners decided we want a minimum wage, which, you know, I'm all for it. But that just didn't affect the White Star Line, it just affected other ship lines too, and anybody who needed coal to power any of their machines. So it ended April 6th, and then Titanic had 176 firemen that shoveled coal on their ship, and they worked in 4-hour shifts, which I think is probably good. You think about it, it was hot down there. I mean, they're breathing in all that ash. It would benefit you to not kill your workers, Rick. No. Don't work so hard. So they would get 8 hours off. Excuse me, and then the Titanic could hold a little over 6,000 tons of coal, and when she sailed, it was actually a little over 5,800. And the reason for that is the White Star Line was trying to get as much coal as they could, and actually there was one passenger who they had to change their plans on another ship they were going to go on because that ship couldn't get coal. So, White Star Line got it. And then, another thing, there was a coal bunker fire in the Titanic. A fire started in coal bunker 6 before it sailed, and the passengers didn't have any clue about it. The captain knew, the crew knew, and the fire wasn't extinguished until April 14th, the day it struck the iceberg. So, and then if you look at this picture of Titanic, you see here there's a little bulge. I don't know how true this is, but this is supposedly where coal bunker 6 was. Because some think that the integrity of the hull was compromised where that fire was. So I don't know. What do you think? Possible. Titanic trivia. What does the RMS stand for in RMS Titanic? Anybody knows? Royal
Marine Maritime.
Royal Mail Ship or Royal Mail Steamer. They could carry mail under contract with the Royal Mail. So they could deliver your mail to you. Just a little something from there. Okay, ticket prices. Could you afford to go on the Titanic? First class suite, $133,000 in today's money. First class berth, $45.91. Second class, $18.34, and third class, $1,071. So which one could you buy? So life on the Titanic. What did you do? Like I said, I mean, what, just look at each other all day? And
Sleep more cow.
yeah, sleep. I'm all for that. So the first class passengers, they could listen to their orchestra, and I put those in quotes because it was 8 people. It wasn't like we had a whole orchestra. You could go to the gym, you can go play squash or go in the turkey bath or the pool, or you could stroll on the promenade, play games, chess, take a nap. Second class passengers, they had access to their own dining room. You can go eat American dishes, French bistro. They had their own promenade too. There's a library they could access, a smoking room for men only. And then third class passengers, they had a general area that they could also relax in, and a men's only smoking room, so they could gamble and smoke, socialize, and they strolled on the poop deck in the back of the ship. First class eating, you gotta have food when you're on the boat, you know. Anybody ever been on a cruise in here? Yeah, so what is it, endless food and party and... So the first class had the Cafe Parisienne, and actually I have an example of one of their menus over there. It was an a la carte menu, and they actually had to pay for that separate, so it wasn't included in their ticket. They had veranda cafes and an a la carte restaurant known as the Ritz. So second class, like I said, they had their own dining area, and here's some of the foods that they would eat. Breakfast, yarmouth, bloaters, ox kidney. Anybody want some ox kidney? Dinner, curry chicken, lamb, and turkey. And then third class, oatmeal porridge, milk, ham and eggs, roast beef, and plum pudding. You know, very, very stocky there. All right, so this brings us to Captain Smith. Captain Edward Smith, since this is the first time I'm introducing him, and he was born January 27, 1850, but I will tell you too, he was also captain of the Olympic, the one that got in the accident, with the first time, so, no, he's captain of the Titanic. I'm not saying he was a bad captain, I don't want anybody to think I'm implying that, but, one of the things you have to remember is since these ships were new, this is why I don't blame him for how he reacted. He has no standard of what to do with these types of ships, because they're so big. He married Sarah Pennington, and they had one child together, and he was likely going to retire after this voyage. And he was known as the millionaire's captain due to his popularity with the wealthy people. But I mean, he had been sailing for years, so think about it. He probably got to meet the who's who, on every ship he's ever been on. So some of the words that were used to describe Captain Smith after he passed away was he was an ideal sort of skipper, fine-looking chap, great man amongst the passenger, an excellent narrator of a fund of excellent stories. Because what else are you going to do in the ship? Listen to the captain tell stories. And then here's the bridge crew. Now everybody that's in red did not make it. The other ones did survive the sinking. And if you notice, there's a wide age range. Of course, your leader is probably the most seasoned, down to a 24-year-old, and then everybody in between. So you have different levels of experience on the boat, on the ship. And then this is the crew that survived. There were 4 of them. They all got, and I say interrogated at the inquiries that were done. But each of them, Officer Harold, 5th Officer Harold, if you watch the movie, I think they had him shoot in the air, but he says he shot down on the side of the boat to try and stop some men from getting into one of the lifeboats. And supposedly he said, "Get back or I'll shoot you all like dogs." And I'm sure he yelled it a little bit more than I did. Officer Lightoller, he was a prominent person in the movie also. And then the other 2 officers, they were assigned lifeboats when they were lowering off the Titanic. Now, this almost Titanic officer, here's another one. He got his orders in March of 1912 that he was supposed to be on the Titanic. He was going to be a second officer. Well, Captain Smith decided to make some changes. He brought most of his crew over from the Olympic. So when he came on, that meant Second Officer Henry Wild was removed, yeah. And then he was appointed, he was removed as second officer, and then Henry Wild was appointed as chief officer. So in his case, he took his locker key. And what was in his locker, supposedly, was the glasses, or the binoculars, that the lookouts used. So they didn't have them. But, years later, here's the key. It was actually auctioned off. He left it to his daughter, and it was auctioned off in 2007 for $145,000. So there's the key. It's a few years late. Okay, that brings us to the day that the ship actually struck the iceberg. So I want to talk about the Marconi wireless operators. Like I said, ham radio is kind of like my new thing that I'm into. It just fascinates me to be able to talk to people from anywhere. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, they were responsible for receiving and sending the Marconi grams, that's what they call them, from the wealthy passengers. They had to pay for that. It was not a free service. They were actually employed by the Marconi Company, so they weren't obliged to answer to the captain of the ship, but it would be wise for them if they wanted to have a pleasant trip that time. So on April 14th at 7:20, they intercepted a message from the SS California that said there were 3 large icebergs 5 miles southward of where they were. So they were, the ice warnings that came in, they would actually get those. And here's a little trivia, Andrea, you probably remember me talking about this. They used to use CQD as their distress signal, not SOS. So CQ meant all signals, and D was for distress. So they did use both of them. They started with CQD, and then eventually it went to the SOS. And I just wanted to put this in, here's all the ice warnings that they received, except this one says that Captain Smith did alter their course a little bit to go further south to try, and my understanding is that's to try and miss some of the icebergs, because this was something, they were aware that there was ice in the Atlantic. This wasn't something that wasn't known. It's just like today they actually track all the icebergs. They didn't have that then. So So here, this last ice warning, it didn't have a prefix on this MSG, which meant that this needed to go to the captain like right now. So this is the ice warning that actually said there's heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs from the Masala. So it makes me wonder, what if Captain Smith would have received that message? Would he have altered his course? Would he have slowed down? I don't know. So on that same night, Captain Smith retires at 9:20. 10 o'clock, the shift change for the officers, and then the lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee begin their watch. And then at 10:55, the SS Californian radios Titanic and Sailman. I'm trying to get my British accent. Sailman, we were stopped and surrounded by ice. Phillips responds, shut up, I am busy. I am working Cape Race. Cape Race was where the Marconi company had a receiver, so that was where they could try to get as many messages as they could, because remember, paying customers want their messages sent. And then 11 o'clock, all the passengers retired to their room. And then that brings us to Frederick. Oh, I forgot I can bring it up. It's hard to get to three. But 3 rings, and then iceberg right ahead. Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee are the lookouts that were on the Titanic that night. Reginald didn't make it, he didn't survive, Frederick did. And in the movie, I think they did it pretty close to what he testified. He rings the bell and says, iceberg, right ahead. And then the calm officer, thank you. It's like, I would have been that calm for a call like that. So they did talk to Thomas Andrews. This was probably good, he was on the ship. He surveyed the damage, and he said Titanic could remain afloat with only 4 compartments flooded, or was built for that. So he predicted that the ship only had about 1 or 2 hours before it was going to sink. So when the man that designed the ship tells you, we're going to sink, like I said, I think that's when everybody took it pretty serious. So the total souls that were on the lifeboats that made it out was 712. And I know these numbers don't exactly add up. It's hard to find exact numbers. Everybody has somewhat the same. But this is pretty close to what I've seen, where first class, second class, third class, and then passengers and crew. And this is actually a picture of the lifeboats in the New York harbor. So water temperatures, I'll go through this pretty quick. That night, most of them, they either froze to death or either froze, drowned, got hit by either debris, could have had heart attacks due to being in cold, instantly put in cold water. Could have been shock, any number of things of those, but mostly probably froze to death. So now Monday, the 15th, the lifeboats begin to be ready to launch at midnight. Oops. So Captain Smith orders Phillips and Harold Bride to send out the distress signal, and although SOS became the official distress signal used earlier, many still use CQD at that time. The Carpathia received their distress signal at 12:20. Come at once, we struck a berg. It's CQD, old man. And it'll take the Carpathia almost 3 hours to get to them. Now, at this time, nobody knows if help's coming for sure or not. There's no system to say, okay, everybody, y'all have to go to your assigned lifeboat. There was no assigned lifeboat. Nobody knew, had Harold Bride gotten to one of the, asked another boat, are they coming? The SS Californian actually had already turned off their equipment for the night because when he sent that last message, it wasn't really nice. So, and there wasn't a standard that you had to have 24-hour radio that was kept, just in case for them that there's an emergency. So at 2:20, the stern disappears below the ocean, and the Titanic's gone. So the Carpathia is actually a Cunard ship, so that was the White Star Line's rival. Captain of the ship was Arthur Rostron, and they got there at 3:30 a.m. firing their rockets. And like I said, nobody knew if help was coming. So most of the people in the lifeboats probably thought that we're just out here, and I guess we're gonna freeze to death out here now. And the Carpathia carried all the survivors. they decided, the captain decided to go ahead and take them to New York. So I don't remember where they were going, but he said, we'll take them in. And then they arrived on April 18th in the harbor at 9:25 at night. So it was a long stretch for the passengers, for the Carpathia and for the Titanic. Now this iceberg, this is a picture of the iceberg that Titanic struck. It was photographed the day after by Chief Steward of the Prince Albert, and he says he noticed a red smear on it, on that part. And let's see, it came 2,000 miles away from Newfoundland coast, and Titanic was traveling at 20.5 knots when it hit the berg. And even though it doesn't look that big underneath, it's one of those where most of it's underneath, or on top, most of it's underneath. And it said it had a jagged edge where it sliced the Titanic below the waterline. So it was around where that one bunker, where the coal fire was, and then you have the coal fire, you have the rivets. You know, it's just, it was probably just a perfect storm of different things. So the iceberg created a 300-foot gash in the Titanic's hull, and the outer steel plates of the ship buckled and cracked, opening a hole between five of the adjacent watertight compartments. So remember what Mr. Andrews said? She could stay afloat with 4. And then remember how I showed you how the water will just go over. So, I mean, what are you going to do? And then this is actually the trajectory. Here's Titanic's trajectory. And then they actually know the way that the iceberg took. So it was almost like they were just right on a collision course, like it was just fated to be. But in early spring and early summer, the Labrador Current transports the iceberg and glaciers from Greenland. So this is a regular phenomenon that they knew about back then too. So the collision damaged the first 6 watertight doors. So we're already over the 4 watertight compartments. The Titanic could stay afloat with up to 4. And the damage was along the starboard side. I think I have the right starboard's right, port is left. And it was concentrated on the starboard side where the iceberg scraped the hull, breaching several watertight compartments. And then the brittle nature of Titanic steel and cold water combined with all the other things that happened. So it seems like it was just doomed to fail. So it took the Titanic 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. I'm going to go through these pretty quick because I want to get to some of the laws that came about after Titanic. At that time, you only had to have ships over 10,000 tons, had to have 16 lifeboats. So it wasn't you had to have one for everybody. The thought was the ship was your lifeboat. Lifeboats were meant just to ferry you from one ship to another, and then they would tow the ship that got damaged back. But that didn't happen with Titanic. So this would have meant Titanic only needed 16, but they had 20. So they were actually over what they were required to have. 13 of the lifeboats were taken to New York with the survivors, and they were given back to the White Star Line, and my understanding is they destroyed them. I don't think they wanted people to remember what happened. Here's one of the collapsibles that Carpathia picked up on Monday the 15th, and then here's their ship, here's the lifeboats in the New York harbor. Now this collapsible, this one really got me when I read this. It was found almost a month after the sinking, and there were still 3 bodies in it. I decided not to show that photo because I actually had that photo, but I didn't think that would probably be great. So on board were 2 firemen from the engine room and a passenger, Thompson Beatty, 37, still dressed in his dinner jacket. Now this man, Mr. John Henry Fornstead, he actually came up with the system that they used to log and identify the victims that were picked up. He's from Halifax, Nova Scotia. So what they would do is they had a notebook. 1 page was dedicated to the victim they found. They were assigned a number. They would log all their belongings, identifying marks, height, weight, hair, and then they would put all their belongings in a bag with the same number and keep it with the person, but they would take their clothes because they were afraid of people taking them as souvenirs or to sell them. And he wrote the death certificate for each victim, and then the cause of death he used was accidental drowning, RMS Titanic. And they still use his way of cataloging, doing that today. So the ships that actually did retrieve the bodies, the McKay Bennett was the one that got the most. They had bodies 1 through 306. So they had ice on the boat with them. They had coffins, bags, things so the bodies could that they wouldn't decay as fast. And actually, see, 119 were buried at sea. If they couldn't identify them, you were buried at sea. And they did try to do a little service, so it wasn't just like, okay, we can't identify you, we're gonna throw you in. 209 were brought back to Halifax, and 59 were claimed by relatives, shipped back to their country, and the White Star Line did not pay for that. If you wanted your family member to come back, you had to pay for it. So these are the cemeteries where the victims from the sinking are buried. So Fairview Lake Cemetery, Mount Olivet, and the Baron de Hirsch, and you can go there and visit these areas too. There was a U.S. Inquisition. U.S. Inquisition. As soon as the ship got to New York, the Carpathia, they were looking for J. Bruce's name. They wanted to know what happened and why did this happen. So there was a special, subcommittee of the Senate Commerce Committee hearings, started on April 19th. So remember, they came in the harbor on the 18th, next day, at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. 82 witnesses, including Mr. Ismay. He used I do not recall that a lot, 1,100 pages. You can download this off the internet, which I have, and I'm going to read it. I haven't read all of it yet, but there's one of my presentations, I took some of when J. Bruce Ismay was questioned as part of it and read it. But yeah, you can go find that, and it resulted in the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, the Radio Act. So now you actually have a dedicated channel to where it has to have silence, so if there's an emergency, that's what they're going to use. 24 hours, it's someone there. And the creation of the International Ice Patrol, so they log where all that ice is, so now they know and they can avoid it. And then, the British had to do one too. So America, we did it first. So theirs was held in London on May 2nd to July 3rd. There were 42 days of official investigation and almost 100 witnesses. And the final report was published July 30th. I think you can find theirs online too. I haven't found it yet, but I'm sure it's saved somewhere out there. They found the Titanic sinking was solely the result of hitting the iceberg, not due to flaws of the ship. So just think about it. If somebody wanted to sue the White Star Line, but as the way we look at law today, well, they already said it's not the fault of the ship, so you can't sue them. Well, they got sued anyway. But anyway, the collision was brought on by dangerously fast speeds. Like I said, I think I mentioned before, that was not unusual for them to plow through an ice field at top speed. That was actually standard practice. Well, and part of their thought was anything that was that big, you would be able to see it and be able to adjust as you needed to. Well, these ships were bigger than what they were used to, so they actually took, from what I can see, I'm not a ship person, so if somebody's watching this online, like, no, that's not right. But my thought would be something that big is not going to respond to you that fast. Think about 18-wheelers on the road. They can put on the brakes, but they're going to go a few more, inches before they stop. And Captain Smith was found not to be at fault because he followed long-standing practice which had not been shown to be unsafe. So in history, he didn't do anything wrong. Now, Mr. Ismay, villain or scapegoat? It was said when he got on the Carpathia, he was pretty listless. He was whisked away to his own room. Doctor had to come to help him. He planned on getting on a ship as soon as he got to America. He was sending messages back to the White Star Line saying, I need a ship. When I get there, I need to go back. But he was served his subpoena before he could do that, so that's why he testified at the U.S. Senate. He sent several marconigrams while he needed a ship, and he used his alias Yamzi. You know what Yamzi is? What's his
His
name?
name
spelled
backwards.
Yeah, his name's spelled backwards, so. But they figured, the US government figured it out, that's how he got him the subpoena. And when he got older, his health declined, in the 1930s. He had diabetes, he had his right leg amputated, and then he died in London on October 17th of 1937 of a stroke. So some people try to make him out to be the bad guy. I mean, I don't know. What's your thoughts? So locating the wreckage, excuse me. I'm gonna just say on this one, they did locate it, 1985. Robert Ballard and his crew did find it, and you can find it on Google Maps too. The musicians of the Titanic, there's two I want to talk about very quickly. Wallace Hartley was the band leader, and he was engaged to Mariah Robinson, that's her picture down there, and they were to be married in June. And she gave Wallace a violin for his engagement gift, and she had it inscribed. Hartley told a former colleague on the Mauritania, should he ever find himself in a sinking ship, he wanted the hymn Near My God would be one of two pieces that he would play in his final moments. And then this is his card with his number, he was 224. None of the musicians made it. And his clothing, and then he actually had a very large a funeral for him because he was the band leader. It was kind of like, okay, he rallied the musicians, let's play to cheer up the people. So that's his memorial where he's buried. And then here is the inscription on his violin. It says, for Wallace, on the occasion of our engagement, from Mariah. And then this is the violin in the case. It was found, I don't know if some of you keep up with Titanic history. This was actually auctioned a few years ago, sold for $1.6 million in 2013 to an anonymous buyer. And it was actually at the Pigeon Forge Titanic Museum, and I didn't get to go see it when I was there. And then the other musician I want to talk about is Jacques LaHume. He was the youngest musician, and his instrument was violin. It was said he was the life of every ship he ever played on, a tall, thin, slim boy with fair, curling hair. He was the happy-faced lad. And he was engaged to be married to a Mary Costin. And then after his death, Mary informed Andrew Hume, which is John's dad, that she was pregnant. And he didn't give her a very favorable response to that. And then later, Andrew Hume, John's dad, received a letter from the Black brothers who supplied the musicians for the Lewistown line, said, we shall be obliged if you will remit to us the sum of, was it 5 shillings, 4, I think it's pence, which is owing to us as per enclosed statement. We shall also be obliged if you would settle the enclosed uniform account. This was sent after he had died in the sinking. So they wanted him to pay for his uniform. The life of a musician. So this is Andrew Hume, this is his dad, and then here's John. And then this is Mary Costin, and then this is their child together. I think it's pronounced John Ann. Well, John Ann had a son. His name's Christopher Ward. He wrote that book that's over there about and the band played on. And then Christopher found out these are Jacques' great grandchildren. He didn't know about them until a few years ago. Apparently, John had a relationship with someone in Jamaica when he was playing at one of the hotels there. Her name was Ethel McDonald, and they had a baby together, which resulted in these children. So I understand maybe why Andrew was upset. He probably knew about the other ones, and now he's got somebody else saying, I have a baby for you. You know? So yeah. So here, John did not make it. He was body number 193, and he is buried in one of the Fairview Cemetery in Halifax. Now, other passengers on the Titanic, I don't know if any of you have heard, this is actually really recent. There was 8 Chinese passengers on the Titanic, and 6 of them survived. And let me get the notes up here. Yeah, there were 8 Chinese, 6 survived. They were expelled from the U.S. almost as soon as they got here because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. They could not be in America. They were believed to be sailors going to the Caribbean for work. And the last survivor pulled from the water was Wing Soon, and he survived by clinging to a wooden door. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Yeah. What actually happened, James Cameron did film this with him on the door, but they decided to change it and they put Kate Winslet Rose on the door. So you see Rose in the movie, and she likes Jack. Spoiler alert. So yeah, I didn't know. That was something new I learned. And then this is the card that has all of their names. This passenger, his name was John Philip Lemesse, I think you say it, LaRoche, and then there's his wife, Juliette Lafall. And I know I said that right, because I'm from Louisiana, and I went to a school with that name. He was born in Haiti in 1886. At the age of 15, he went to France to study engineering, and he spoke French, Creole, and English fluently. And he was going to sail back to Haiti on a ship called the La France, but they had a policy of separating children from their parents. I don't understand that. He was going to be on first class. Everybody traded for a second class ticket on the Titanic. His wife and one of his daughters was able to get into a lifeboat, and then he rushed to get the other daughter in, but he did not get in the lifeboat with them, and his body was never recovered. And his wife, if I remember correctly, she didn't remarry, but she kept her kids really close to her, and I think she was really traumatized from that night. And then Dorothy Gibson, she was an actress and model. She started in the very first motion picture that they did about the Titanic sinking called Saved from the Titanic, and the movie came out 31 days after the sinking. It said that she cried sometimes, probably because it was, pretty recent to when that would happen. She wore the same clothes in the movie that she was wearing in the lifeboat. She was one of 28 people aboard the very first lifeboat, so they were actually in the water longer than the others. See, I'm doing good on time. And then most of you have probably heard of Margaret Brown. She spent her first months of 1912 in Paris. She was friends with John Jacob Astor IV. She booked passage on Titanic to go back because her oldest grandchild was sick. She helped passengers board lifeboats, and then she was persuaded to get into lifeboat 6. From my understanding, if she didn't want to do something, she wasn't going to do it. She threatened to throw the quartermaster, Robert Hitchens, overboard because he wouldn't go back to help others. And I like the way that was portrayed in the movie. While on Carpathia, this just shows you how this woman was. She was already organizing a committee of first-class survivors to secure necessities for other people. And then when she landed in New York, she went to the Ritz-Carlton and she set up a Titanic Survivors Committee to help people. So I mean, this woman was, the more I learn about her, the more I love her. And this is a saying that she said, after being brine, salted, in the ocean, I am now high and dry. I have had flowers, letters, telegrams, people until I am befuddled. So she said, if I must call a specialist to examine my head, it is due to the title of Parent of the Titanic. So she was a pretty cool person. And then John Jacob Astor IV, he was the richest passenger. His estimated net worth at that time was $87 million. And he's $2.83 billion today, so he would probably beat out some other people. He was married his first wife in 1891, and they divorced. And he married Madeline, who he was on the Titanic with, and he was 47, she was 18. That caused quite a scandal there. And then Astor's last words to his wife were, "The sea is calm, you'll be all right, you're in good hands, I'll see you in the morning." And he did not survive. He was body number 124. And I have to say, they probably had the easiest time identifying his body just from the way he was dressed. Supposedly he was dressed, in his best. And then he had his initials sewn on the labels of his jacket, so he would have been one quick. And then the Strausses, Isidore and Ida. In 1871, they married. They had 7 children during their marriage. He served as a congressman, and they were traveling for the winter in Europe, originally planning to come back on another ship, and they had to switch because of the cold strike. He wouldn't enter the lifeboat while women and children were still on the ship, but Ada said, "Well, I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so we will die together. And they were last seen on the deck standing arm in arm. I know in the movie they had them in their room, but this was what I found supposedly they were. And then Wendy Rush is their great-great-granddaughter of the Strausses, and Wendy's husband was Stockton Rush, founder of Ocean Gate. Do you know what Ocean Gate is? It's the submersible that imploded, that they were going on the Titanic. So she's had 2 losses. I was like, you have to be kidding me, oh my word. I was trying to find which child that she was related to, but I wasn't able to find it, but this was on most of that was her great-great-grandparents. Was Jack and Rose real? Because I always get this question. Joseph Dawson, Jay Dawson, he was body 227. He was buried in Fairview Lawn Cemetery. He shoveled coal in the bowels of Titanic. He has no relation to Jack Dawson in the movie. James Cameron said he didn't know this person existed, and Jack is not based on him. So, so that is Titanic, a story for the ages. So, I think, are we doing, oh, I did almost exactly an hour, wow. I actually had to pick out some slides earlier.